Okay, welcome back. I know some people are still settling in, but with the schedule we have today and the impressive list of speakers, we want to keep things going to give everybody a chance. So with that, IBM Hyperledger, and I'm going to introduce Matt to give us an overview of what they're doing, some of the things they're doing, what they're working on. Matt?
Thank you. Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for quieting it down. I appreciate it. And my name is Matt Morelius. I am part of IBM Global Business Services. That's our lingo for consulting. Thanks everybody for trickling in. I appreciate it. So we'll get into IBM and Hyperledger and their relationship in just a moment. First, I guess just a little bit about myself. I'm again, a consultant, but I've been working in the blockchain space for about 2 years, which I think puts me in the in the older realm. I joined the capital markets practice and just doing sort of traditional analytics, data, target operating model consulting, but always bothering my leadership about, we should really get some blockchain in here. There seems like a use case here and there, and about a year and a half ago, I got word that the practice leader of what was then the capital markets practice, Pramod Achanta, had been in communications with DTCC about some legacy system replacement onto blockchain. We'll talk more about that in the future, or the very near future. But so I started playing a role in that RFP, and then a couple of months later, I'd always had a crush on Northern Trust as a blockchain use case, and you're going to be hearing from Sabrina later in the day, so I don't want to steal any of her thunder, but eventually they got in communication with us, and we started working together, and so my recent claim to fame is having led IBM GBS's initiative at Northern Trust for the last year, and very recently I just rolled off and started in IBM Logistics on the blockchain, so a little bit outside of financial services, but we'll talk about that too. Couple of things before we get started. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. We got mics up here, but you can also just, give me a wave or a holler, and I will repeat the question for the audience. I know there's probably and I know there's been some intro stuff earlier in the day, but it's tough with blockchain because A, everybody wants to talk about it. B, unlike other technologies, everybody, including laymen, are really interested in its inner workings, which I think is fascinating. And then C, you've got a large sort of learning curve that people are on different points on. So we'll try and address the entire audience as best we can. But yeah, please interrupt me with questions. It'll be better than my content. All right, so this is our blockchain evangelism slide. Trust and certainty. We've got a lot of components, right? Consensus, chief among them, but I think about trust and certainty. You've got certain parts of the marketplace where trust is impossible, and blockchain comes in and fills the gap. It's sort of the original Bitcoin use case. And then you've got other use cases, other parts of the economy where trust is necessary, and we go and we construct it, but we construct it in really expensive ways. That's like DTCC and these large centralized clearing corporations, for instance, and there are other parts of the economy as well. So we're going to get into that. First, let's talk about IBM and its relationship to blockchain, how it's going to the market. Let me first start with a pretty big correction. Hyperledger is its own organization. It's run by Linux. There is no P&L relationship between IBM and Hyperledger. We contribute a lot of code. We believe in it, as we have always believed in open standards, and that the economy works better when you define certain systematic ways that everybody's going to do things. And we, as well as the Linux Foundation, believe that Hyperledger is a great way of going about that. Within Hyperledger, again, the organization, and I'm just going to say this over and over so that I really make my point that it's not IBM, has many technologies under its umbrella. The one that we focus most on and sort of gets conflated with Hyperledger itself as the organization is Fabric. We're on Fabric 1.0. Most of the IBM projects that you're going to hear me talk about, like Maersk Global Trade or Supply Chain, Walmart and Food Safety, Northern Trust just went on 1.0. These are continuous link settlement, or these are 1.0 projects. and we're contributing a lot of code, but not necessarily there's no financial relationship there per se. So that's sort of the core technology piece that IBM's focused on, that foundation that we're all going to sort of build the new economy on, right? So what goes on top of that? It's platform, or maybe a better way of thinking about it would be product. These are the core technologies that you're going to use to build whatever business. Obviously, Walmart and food safety and Maersk and supply chain fit nicely into that, but as time goes by, you'll see more sort of functional pieces, right? Like something like delivery versus payment, or maybe even something like document management, a little bit more, help you build an application for your business, and that's that platform layer. And then getting on top, it sort of gets a little bit blended, but think about this as commercializing your blockchain application. You take experts, which apparently I am, or at least I market it as one, and experts like me and my colleagues to help you drive towards a solution that's going to allow your business to do something new, or allow your network, your sort of series of businesses and organizations, to do something new. So we'll talk about Fabric for a moment. Very recently, when general, as it says, IBM's contributed a lot of the code, but not all of the code. And in here, obviously, we had my colleagues from Microsoft and their relationship with Ethereum just before. These are, analogous offerings. But Hyperledger is sort of born of the enterprise, with Linux, who's got a sort of history of making enterprise open source applications, with them in the leadership sort of governance role, trying to help business leaders, give them technology that they're going to be able to build a business off of. At this point, you could go online and download this and get this set up. It doesn't need to be in an IBM cloud environment. Obviously, my leadership would like it if it were, but you can set this up on your home machine or whatever infrastructure you'd like to and get started. As we had talked about, there's a lot of different players in this space. You'll note IBM, but also perhaps our nearest competitor, Accenture, are in this premier tier of contributors. A lot of the economy is trying to make blockchain work, right? That's a lot of like what today's about. We all believe in distributed systems. This is a group of organization, a group of leaders who are kind of backed the Hyperledger and the Linux horse, and we're going to see it through. But let's talk about this just going up the stack one bit into something called Hyperledger Composer. Sorry about my mic distance. So shorthand, what does Hyperledger Composer let you do? It lets you write smart contracts in JavaScript. Without Composer, you might be required to get into the Go code, but this will allow you to leverage your current development talent, or just more common development talent to achieve something on the blockchain. It's a really quick accelerator. I had started in the 0.6 world, in the pre-Composer world, and you're just talking fewer developers, more ramp-up time, and now that is, just about anybody who's coming out has got some JavaScript skills and they can get into Composer, and you're also going to see this in other languages relatively soon as well. All right. So now let's talk about, so honestly, I know this has been marketed as IBM Hyperledger. Again, two different things. I want to spend most of the rest of the time talking about ways that we're using this technology. Some of the stuff I know about, some of the stuff I know about directly and indirectly. Let's talk about the big ones. We're going to spend most of the time on that top row in financial services and a fair bit in that middle row. But while I have you, I want to mention some things that are not financial related, and that's Maersk, this guy on the bottom left and the bottom middle with food safety. These are big systematically important parts of the economy where geography, technology, and really that, if you think about the data that exists in the real world or that's associated with real assets, is hard to get into some sort of digital system. What these two initiatives, led by Walmart and Maersk respectively, in cahoots with IBM, are doing is getting that data into a trustable source. They're doing it across geographies, across sort of, potatoes and cheeseburgers and carrots in the Walmart case and in Maersk in the trucking and especially in the shipping lanes. A lot of good puns in the blockchain food safety world. I say that only because, and I know we're coming from a financial perspective in here, but you've got a lot of data and a lot of processes that had been held in filing cabinets and fax machines and phone calls that's now being digitized. And that has ramifications in terms of the information that's available to you, the optimization that is possible, and just what new, and once you have those two, you start to think about different business models and different ways of, monetizing these things. But I just wanted to mention those while I had you. All right, let's speak quickly about sort of the stack and how we approach it at IBM. As a heuristic, I generally think about any blockchain project as maybe 40% blockchain, at most 50%. You can just look at the bottom 3 layers versus the top 3 layers. Starting from the bottom, the stuff's got to go somewhere. We can talk about on-prem versus off-prem if you want, but we have a formerly called High Security Business Network. Now just think of it as IBM Blockchain Platform. Allow you to get this thing running in the cloud, usually through Bluemix. And then it's about that green layer, the fabric and the protocol. That's what we were talking about earlier, 1.0. These are your most essential components, right? Things like the consensus mechanism, things like membership services, that in Fabric land are all modular and potentially customizable, but that's because we've got things that are working off the shelf for you. Now moving one level up, we start to get into what's specific to your use case, or at least your network's use case, and that's the smart contracts. What processes are you looking to share that weren't possible in pre-blockchain world? So that portion, we spend a lot of our time thinking and worrying about that portion, but honestly, just as much concern needs to be given to that top half. So moving up, honestly, event services and API, this is important, but not as important as those top 2. Presentation layer, and as you might have just seen from the Microsoft presentation, the UI is always a challenge because a lot of this stuff is all happening behind the screen. We're achieving something new, and it doesn't immediately show up on my screen. It maybe shows up on somebody else's screen 30 seconds later that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. They wouldn't have been able to have access to that information. Finally, it's that consumer application, that actual commercialized element of the blockchain. How are we making money off of this thing? What are we doing that is new that we weren't able to do in the prior universe? All right, so let's talk about some. These are probably the big early heavy hitters. Again, we mentioned DTCC earlier in the day. So this one's pretty straightforward, right? We needed centralized trust, or we needed trust. We created a centralized body quite expensively to generate that trust. But that was reliant on the technology of the day, the technology of when that decision was made, and that technology aged quickly, was inflexible, was not modular, and so blockchain really nicely serves to remedy those problems. They contacted us about 1.5 years ago and got in cahoots with these member firms as well, JPMC, Citi, and others. This is a pretty straightforward one, right? We're doing something that we're achieving trust where it had been achieved before, but we're doing it in a cheaper, more efficient, more modular way. CLS, similar, but exciting because of scale. So derivatives is big, right? $11 trillion. I'm guessing foreign exchange is maybe $4 trillion a day. Incredibly high volume, and these are achieved on disparate systems where you've got, some version of error, some element of error rate and non-transparency. We can fix all of that. We can fix all of that, and we can do it in a relatively straightforward way because fundamentally these trades are knowable. This one's DTCC is on on something that is joining on technology that is becoming part of the Hyperledger sort of portfolio, but CLS has been on Fabric. And then finally, and I know I'm going to steal a little bit of Sabrina's thunder, but I want to talk about Northern Trust because it's what I've been doing for the last year of my life. So this, in many ways, if you imagine that sort of canonical blockchain diagram where you've got like little ledgers all over the screen and then lines going everywhere, private equity is really that, right? I'm a fund manager. I need to make a decision. I need to start a fund or I need to buy a portfolio company. I communicate with my sort of coterie of lawyers and accountants. Then I communicate with the custodian, and they then communicate to either the investor and their coterie of auditors and lawyers and the regulator. In the current state technology, we don't need to do it that way, right? We can put all this information on chain, and we can allow information and processes to be knowable beforehand. This one's really exciting, right? Because these first two, at least for the moment, these are post-trade, right? You're using your own systems, at least as of today. You're using your own system. However you traded FX before is how you're trading FX now. It's just that that record is maintained and immutable and auditable. With Northern Trust, you're pre-trade and post-trade. You get to know when the fund manager makes the decision, what that decision was. You don't have to rely on snail mail. You don't have to go through the intermediary of the custodian or a regulator. That has it cuts out the cost now, but that has a lot of positive ramifications downstream, right? It's not necessarily expressed, but you can think of, all right, so this is all available on the chain. I can look at it. I right now face a very long lead time. It's one of the attractive things about private equity, right? These are long-lived assets that can get you high return, and that's a feature, but the defect side of that is it's hard for me to get my money out if I need to. You can imagine how blockchain goes in and potentially alleviates that defect. So let's move internationally. These are two I really like a lot. So Bolsa in Chile, securities lending. Somewhat similar to that private equity example where I talked about the canonical slide, except it's not between a bunch of firms, it's between a bunch of data sets, right? I have my master service agreement about what's going to happen for this particular securities loan, and then I have a series of data related to that underlying security, its price or whatever else it might be, and making sure that executions that are required by that contract happen based on real-time data is very difficult to achieve. You're going to have higher error rates, and stuff's going to fall through. Blockchain is a really nice alleviant to that. That one's been really successful. I like to see where that one's going. DTC, which I think is Trade Consortium, it's solving a more sort of systematic market problem. Especially in Europe, small, medium-sized firms can't necessarily get trade financing, right? You've got geographical concerns, you have potential capital concerns, and this allows a business owner in one country who's making a deal with a business owner in another country to go in and get that deal financed and achieve delivery versus payment in a contractable sort of with automated execution, right? This is achieving something new in the marketplace. And you can imagine so that's going in there and that's financing sort of current state deal structures. And you're still going about finding your deal partners in the way that you always would, but you can imagine this technology as a platform allowing business to operate and trades to happen in new ways, right? I'll let you use your imagination there. All right, let's talk about insurance networks. AIG, this is a very top-down blockchain, but AIG Standard Chartered has a need to just deal with one provider of insurance contracts, but for a number of countries. So you can imagine that within the countries, you're going to have plenty of little rules, plenty of little smart contracts that might need to be executed. And then at the higher global level, you're going to have a series of smart contracts that are going to be executed. This is going to lead to errors. This is going to lead to poor transparency, opaqueness. The blockchain allows that sort of nested smart contract structure to happen. So if something happens in Kenya where you have very specific rules, that is executed, but then any changes to the master agreement that's international can also be executed simultaneously. B3I, this is an interesting one. This is more sort of in that R3 model of a consortium. These are like insurers like Swiss Re, really high information insurers that know what's happening and provide a lot of analysis for sort of more consumer-facing insurers. These guys are getting in there and they're defining very fundamental elements of what an insurance smart contract would be, and they're building those up. Remains to be seen how this will be, if there's something commercializable within this consortium, or if these guys are defining standards that they'll then split back up and define their own little blockchain initiative, sort of like what happened with R3. And then finally, China construction. Think about this one as, so earlier we had talked about unmet demand, the unmet demand of capital for small business trading, small business financing. Here you have got the unmet demand of a client base, of a bank's client base for insurance, right? And this is where bancassurance always comes in. And that bank doesn't immediately have access to the insurance. But now you have a easy pass-through where the inputs from the clients, the inputs from the banking clients, and the inputs for the policy that the insurer is providing can be blockchained and executed in a seamless way without there being unnecessary handshakes between the insurer and the bank and their client base. So you can see a couple of patterns here, right? You've got a top-down sort of nested structure. I have a very sophisticated system. I don't understand everything that's happening, especially in a global environment, and I want to make sure it's all being executed correctly. That's what we've got going on in AIG. China construction, this is a little bit of an unmet demand, sort of like what we had going on in DTC, and I would also put Northern Trust in that same bucket. So as the business minds start thinking about what are the patterns here? What are the patterns to commercialization? We're very early on, right? Some people argue with me on that, but I think you're starting to see how this will be economical in the future, especially when you get into these vertical examples like Northern Trust and DTC. That's all I've got. I will take any questions, though I think that's about it. We do have copies of this, though I know no one here is a blockchain dummy, but for some reason we have this, and you can also go to this link. I'll leave this up here for a second. Yeah, otherwise I appreciate everybody's time, and yeah, we got a question? Well, if you want IBM Cloud for your blockchain, then it would be managed service. But you can go and download Fabric for free. Yeah, that's you do it on your machine right now. Got a question in the middle.
What does blockchain buy you that you cannot get with the regular database and all these use cases?
Well, sometimes I joke that the blockchain or the database just really needed a rebrand. But no, that's the right question to ask. In the short term, we don't necessarily have great technology to have trustless shared databases, right? And that's where the trustless blockchains, permissionless blockchains come in. In the permission blockchain, you're constraining your user base, right? You're excluding certain members, but you're still not necessarily constraining exactly what they can do. They still have ownership over the peer. So you need to figure out ways of constraining their activity so that if you're Wells Fargo and I'm JPMC, we're part of some shared network. We don't necessarily want overlap in each other's information, right? You don't want me to have a look at your goods. Blockchain's one way of achieving that. Is it the only way, to your point? Maybe not. It could if you architect it correctly. You might not be able to share the same processes, though, through smart contract that you would be through smart contracts. Yes, you do have to write them anyway, but by writing them as smart contracts, you are, listen, they're more modular, they're more, this guy's asking the hard questions, guys. If I were to, so it's a case-by-case basis. Listen, if some use cases where where you're going to have relatively simple process, yeah, knock your socks off with a NoSQL database and, whitelisting your entry and or put it on FTP, whatever you want to do to sort of constrain your access to the data. IBM believes, and I think a lot of our colleagues in other parts, I assume Microsoft as well to a certain extent, believe that by building a blockchain infrastructure and utilizing smart contracts, not only do you achieve that same effect, but you also basically lower the cost of entering in new people, new entrants into your system, new participants, and providing them different functionality that you would be more costly in a more traditional model. Is this all entirely proven? Not necessarily. We're a year in. Fabric got released 2 months ago. I think that it would be wrong-headed to assume that blockchain is entirely proven. We are here and we believe that it will be, but that's our job. I'm not necessarily going to prove it to you today in a 8-slide PowerPoint deck. But all of us together sort of need to figure out what are the best ways of building distributed systems. I'm a big fan of Algorand, a non-block technology out of MIT Media Lab that can help you build distributed systems. But blockchain will work as well, as will potentially something like that, a more distributed table technology, and maybe even more traditional systems. But we need to all sort of indulge ourselves in these. But I think that might be it. I'm here. You guys can ask me questions later, but we go to the next time.